Hey guys, this is going to be the second episode of my guide to drafting, comprehensive guide to drafting, and this episode is about a system called B.R.E.A.D. B.R.E.A.D is an acronym that is used to determine what cards you should be picking from draft packs in a very basic way. It's pretty much lowest common denominator. It's a very simple method. It's great for beginners. I mean, even high-end drafters sort of have it up there somewhere. There are more complicated things they take into consideration when they're picking their cards. It's not like a set of go-by rules. You don't always want to go for B.R.E.A.D, especially if you're drafting an archetype. But that's later on. Essentially, this is just a set of rules you can follow if you're new to drafting, and it'll help you get better cards out of your pack. B.R.E.A.D is an acronym. The B stands for bombs. The R stands for removal, the E stands for evasion or sometimes efficient cards, the A stands for aggro or abilities sometimes, and the D stands for dregs, or do not play. The system is very basic, but you know, if you don't know a lot about drafting, it's a good place to start. A bomb, which is the B in B.R.E.A.D, is a card that can win the game by itself if it's left unchecked and it resolves. As long as this card's on the field, you're probably in a pretty good position. There are a few types of bombs. They don't have to be troops, but a lot of them are. They can be spells or removal, but it usually just extends to sort of mass removal. There are some easy examples of bombs, and I can show you a couple here. Jadim here is Uranaz is an obvious bomb. He's a 7-cost troop. It's kind of hard to get to in limited, but you can get there. And he's a 5/5 flyer, so he's just about on curve, maybe a little bit over. But his effect, it brings a troop from your opponent's graveyard into play and puts it under your control when you play this card. And also when he attacks and deals damage, he does the same thing again. So obviously this is a very powerful effect, and a lot of the real good bombs are going to be legendary cards. You're not going to see them very much, but if you get one, you'd probably want to consider, you know, maybe switching your colors if it's a late pick, or essentially building around it if you get it early. But cards like this that have a big body and a relevant effect, a powerful effect, are usually bombs. Another example of a bomb is Ash Harpy here. It's got flight, speed, and rage 4. So this thing costs 6. It's a 4/4 flight, which is, again, well, it's not 4/4 flight, it's a 0/4 flight, but it has rage 4. That means every time this card attacks, it gets an extra 4 attack. It also has speed, so it can attack the turn it comes into play. And this card can win you the game in like 2 turns. Jadim, another really powerful card. 5-cost 5/5 flyer, which is directly on curve. Plus it has another effect, which every time you play a card, it gets permanent +X+X. So this guy can get pretty big pretty fast. Another type of bomb is a card with sort of low cost and really high power. They usually don't have good effects. They usually have sort of detrimental effects, but having them out uncontested can usually win you the game. Easy example is Core of the Mountain God. It's a 3-cost 5/4. So that's a pretty big troop for 3 cost. It's pretty much going to be, you know, hard to deal with early on in the game, and it can win you the game if they're taking their time and slow. There are some hard to play bombs. It really depends what sort of deck you're building. Sadistic Castigator can be hard to play. Great effect. It's a 3/4 flyer for 6, which isn't the best stats, but its effect can obviously win you the game. But you really have to build around it and build into blood, because it has a triple threshold. Another easy example of a card that is really powerful but kind of hard to play with is Fist of Brigadon. It's got a 6 wild threshold, so you basically have to be playing mono wild if you want to play this guy. But if you get it in an early pick, then you know, playing this card isn't too hard, and it'll probably do a lot of work for you. Other cards that are hard to cast but really powerful are ones with really high resource costs, and an easy example of that here is Wrathwood Colossus. It's a 9-cost card, and getting to that in limited when you're only at about 17 resources is probably going to take a lot of the game, and you really have to build around stalling your opponent out and making sure you can hold the game long enough until you can play a card like this. But once this card comes down, it's usually going to win you the game for the most part. Bombs can also be removal, usually mass removal. Extinction is a clear example of that. It may not win you the game, but played right, it pretty much does, because it gives you huge card advantage. If you're holding on to Extinction, you open it in your hand, you can just pretty much let them play out troops. As soon as you play this card, you get like a 1 for 3 or 1 for 4, 1 for 5 even, and once you've gained that sort of card advantage, you know, you're probably going to win the game. So this can be considered a bomb, although it doesn't win the game straight away, but it can, just to the advantage it gives you. Another card I would consider a bomb is a card that can win the game when you play it. Cards like Life Siphon, Burn to the Ground maybe, not so much, because Life Siphon obviously has a life swing of a much bigger difference, because you're gaining the same amount as you deal, so it's going to be harder for them to kill you as well. The R in B.R.E.A.D stands for removal, and removal's much easier to explain. It's essentially a card that removes another card from the game, or multiple cards. Sometimes you can get a mass removal that can't really be considered a bomb, and maybe even considered complete crap. But this is your main way of dealing with your opponent's bombs. So if your opponent plays like an Uranaz, you need to get rid of this, so you need a removal. That's why it's the second most important thing. You win the game with your bombs, and you stop your opponent winning the game with their bombs by using removal. So primarily you want cards that are going to win the game, and then second in priority is stopping your opponent from winning the game, and that's where removal comes in. And there are a few good removals, a few not so good ones. We'll go through a couple now. Repel here is a pretty decent removal. It destroys any attacking troop. It does require them to attack, so it's not going to get rid of a Castigator or something like that. So it has its limitations, but it's still fairly decent. Most things in Limited will be attacking you, so you can pretty much count on getting rid of something good with this card. Inner Conflict, again, doesn't deal with things like Sadistic Castigator, but it can deal with you know, Wrathwood Colossus, Jadeem, Ash Harpy. It stops the troop from attacking or blocking. Unfortunately, it can't be used on anything that just sits there and has a great effect that's going to kill you. And then Murder is, you know, it's fairly decent. It kills any non-artifact troop. It just kills it straight up dead. The only problem is there are a lot of artifacts out there now, thanks to dwarves and artifacts being really good in draft. So this card isn't that high on my list, because you're always going to run into you know, at least one dwarf deck when you're playing in a draft, and this card isn't really going to help you too much. Some removal isn't quite as good. It requires you to be playing against the right deck, it requires the right situation to be in effect, or it can just be hard to use. Some examples of this type of removal are Nature Reigns, really great against artifact decks. Obviously another card I would consider a bomb is Volcannon, and this card removes that, and pretty much removes any of the big troops in that deck as well. So maybe this would be in your sideboard, your reserves, and you'd bring this in game 2 to deal with that Volcannon, because you've seen it in game 1. Terrible Transfer is a removal, kind of hard to use though. It costs 5 for a start, which is pretty high, although when you want to get rid of bombs, this probably isn't that high. The real drawback is though, it deals 1 damage to target troop for each blood you have, blood threshold, and you may not have that much blood threshold. If you go on dual colour, this card's going to be pretty much useless against bombs. You're probably going to be hitting troops at like 3 toughness or 4 toughness at best. To really play this card, you need to be in mono blood, and that's the only way it's going to be the bomb remover that you need it to be. Another card of the same example is Ruby Lance. Pretty much does the same thing, except you don't gain any life off of this one. It costs less as well, but it does 1 damage to target troop for each ruby you have. A little bit easier to use due to the cost, but again, it's limited by that threshold, and you need to be heavy in ruby in order to really consider playing that card, because removal is great, but a 3 cost removal that only kills like 2 defense troops, probably not that good. Another type of removal is troops that have an effect that is removal, and these are usually the best types of removal in my opinion, just because they give you card advantage. Essentially, you play a card like Buccaneer or Rockcaster, these two here, and they'll remove a card from the board. I mean, Buccaneer isn't so much card advantage, but essentially where you're playing a normal removal spell, you're trading your card in your hand for their card on the board. Both cards go. With these troop based removal spells, they have effects that come in. You keep the troops, so you remove one of their troops and you get to keep a body on the field as well, so you're actually at a +1 card advantage on them. as soon as you play one of these cards. Buccaneer again, it returns it to the hand. You're probably going to see it again next turn, but this card can waste your opponent's turn, essentially. If they've tapped out 4 and played a, I don't know, a honeycap or something. That's probably not the best example. Do not Buccaneer honeycaps. They tapped out, I don't know, 5 to play a Jadim. You can drop your Buccaneer in it, shoves it back to the hand, makes it now 6 cost. You'll probably see it again next turn, but they've essentially spent a whole turn tapping all their resources to do nothing. So the 2/2 probably isn't going to help you against the Jadim when it comes down again, but it's slowed them down. It's a pretty good tempo card, and it obviously gives you a troop as well. So it's a card with another card tacked onto it. Same with Rockcaster. Put it into play, it kills a troop with cost 3 or less. So you kill a troop and you get a body on the board as well. Pretty high cost for not great stats, but the removal effect kind of makes it worthwhile. And probably the best example of this is this guy here, Crazy Squirrel Titan. When it comes into play, it battles target opposing troops. So this guy can come into play and kill anything with 4 or less defense. If you've got Command Tower out, maybe you can do more, but for the most part, he's going to be coming in killing something, and then you've got a huge troop on the board that they then have to deal with. So potentially you could get a murder out of their hand, and you've just gone +2 because they've got rid of 2 cards, and this guy was just 1 card. So yeah, that's removal. Obviously there are varying types of removal, and it's not all equal. You need to be very careful about what removal you take. You don't take any removal. You got to weigh up the options and see what's right for your deck. The E in B.R.E.A.D stands for Evasion or Efficient cards. Most of the time. There are, you know, various things that people think these letters stand for, but Evasion's pretty simple. It basically means that you have a troop that your opponent can't block, and that's mostly done by the keyword flight, I believe. Yeah, and flight means it's in the air, and only other flying troops can block it. Anything on the ground cannot block this card, so it's pretty good. It means you can attack with the card if you want to and just get the damage through, which obviously is how you win games. You get damage through, so anything that can't be blocked is pretty good. And obviously if you need to, you can hold it back as a blocker as well. There are cards that are just straight up unblockable. Cards like Eldritch Dreamer here, this troop can't be blocked. Also has a major socket, so you can do some pretty nasty stuff with him. You can make him draw a card every time he deals damage to the opponent, which is obviously, you know, kind of crazy considering he can't be blocked. So this is probably what I consider a bomb rather than an evasion troop. It's a bomb with evasion on it. It's going to win you the game if it remains there, because you just get so much card advantage. You get free damage through, but you know, it's the only troop with unblockable currently, so I had to kind of throw it in here to show you that there are other types of evasion than flight. The 2 basically staple flyers in this format are Mystic of the Tranquil Dream, who isn't a flyer by nature, but you can add a flight gem to him and he'll become a flyer, and he's a 2/4 flyer for 4. And Skull Griffin, who's also a 2/4 flyer for 4. He has a double threshold, making him a little bit less powerful than the Mystic, obviously. In fact, quite a lot less powerful, because you can do anything you want with Mystic because it's got a socket. There are exceptions to this rule. You don't necessarily want to play any troop with flight just because it's got evasion. Windborn Acolyte is a pretty good example of this. You do not really want to play this card. Maybe if you've got like 2 or 3 air superiorities or something, you might want to take this guy because he's going to be like a 3/3 for 1. But most of the time, his stats are just not good enough to really want to run this card in your deck. It's kind of underpowered. It is like above curve, but the curve is 1, so again, not that great. Another example of a not so great flyer is this guy. He's a 4/1 flyer with flight for 5 cost, which is, you know, 4/1 flyer is pretty good if it costs like 4 maybe, or even 3. But for 5 cost, 4/1, the stat line isn't great, and this dies to Zarad Venom Scorn to Atrophy. It's very, very easy to get rid of. When you can get a 2/4 flyer for 4, you know, this card just isn't great. It's not the worst card in the world. I wouldn't say never take it, but most of the time you probably want to avoid this guy. So E also stands for Efficient cards, and they're just cards that you know, have the potential to give you card advantage, do cool things to your opponent. Good examples of this would be Wind Whisperer. He's a 3-cost 1/2, not great on the stats, but he is sort of pseudo removal. He can keep a troop locked down in pretty much your choice of troop. So, you know, maybe he could be considered removal, but I would put him very, very high on the efficient cards list rather than removal, just because, you know, he's not permanent. He can die, and he may not do enough for you to get rid of that troop you need. You know, the spell shield and stuff like that. So he's pretty good, and he is an efficient card. So he's sort of third on the priority list, around the level of evasion troops. In my opinion. Other really efficient cards are all of the aura cards. These usually get you some sort of card advantage, in the sense that you'll play this on a troop, it'll get bigger, and your opponent won't be ready for it. Because it's a quick action, you can play these cards at any time, and you do it when you're blocking or they are blocking you, to make your troop bigger, and you take out their troop. Maybe it would have been a trade, maybe their troop would have killed your troop, but using one of these cards puts you on top and takes out their troop. So sometimes this will be a 2-for-1, sometimes this will be a 1-for-1, and sometimes this will just be a straight up +1, and maybe even more than that, depending on how many troops they want to throw at it to block you off. A card that's pretty low in this tier is Wild Growth. And, you know, it does the same thing as Wild Aura, but you can only use it once, and then the effect goes away. It's a temporary effect, so it can force better trades, it can put you a card up, but it's just not as good as the auras, because the effect is not permanent. So it doesn't give you as much card advantage, but it can be useful, especially if you're being double blocked or something like that. It's still a fairly decent card, just very, very low in this tier of efficient cards. So I guess another efficient card would be maybe Lixil. It really depends on if you need the fixing or not, but she's actually, for me, in the tier below, which is A, the A in B.R.E.A.D for Aggro and Abilities. And this is basically just a filler for your deck. The cards that, once you've gone through the first 3 tiers of what's good in your deck, the good cards essentially, you want to fill out your deck and round it up to the 23 with cards that aren't terrible and playable, essentially. And I think Lixil falls into that category. She's a 3/3 for 3, which is pretty good, and you're never going to use her effect, ever going to use her effect. But a 3/3 for 3 is on curve and very, very playable. Another example of this is Feraloga. Bit of a high threshold cost, but for 2 costs you get 3/2 with Crush, so you get keyword and you get more power than you're supposed to for this cost. So this card, although not great because it's only a 2-cost card, it wouldn't be considered evasion. Could be maybe considered an efficient card, but for the most part it's an aggro card, and this would be one of the cards you fill out your deck with. It's pretty good, not terrible, not amazing, but playable. There are some cards with decent abilities that can help support your deck, and cards like that, Howling Brave, this guy comes in, he gives you a wild threshold, and you can tap him to gain 1 temporary resource for the turn. So again, not an amazing card, it's not going to win you games, but as a 23rd pick, 24th pick, filler card for your deck, he's pretty decent if you're in Wild. Researcher Adept again, this card actually gains value in an archetype deck, which is the Dwarves, but we'll talk about archetypes a bit later. This card here is 2/3 for 4, which isn't the worst in the world, but when he comes into play, you draw a card. It's a cantrip, it's a conditional cantrip though, so I would probably run this card if I was running a couple of artifacts, just as a filler card for my deck, just in case you can get it off. If you're running Bertram, obviously this guy becomes much better, probably a guaranteed cantrip, which ups the value of him slightly. And by the way, cantrip is a card that replaces itself, so a card that when it comes into play, you draw a card. It ups the value. The draw a card line on any card pretty much ups the value of that card for a player by quite a large amount. Okay, so the D stands for Dregs or Do Not Play. These are cards that you never want to play in draft, and they're for the most part easy to spot, but there are a couple that maybe aren't so easy to spot. They're just terrible cards you don't want to play. They're not efficient enough to be aggro abilities cards. They're certainly not evasion cards or efficient cards, and they're certainly not bombs. These are the cards you basically want to avoid picking altogether during the draft step, and probably leave out of your deck if you can help it when you build your deck. So Easy example of this card is Zodiac Shaman. It's a 5-cost 2/5. You never want to be playing this card. You never want to, when you pay 5 resources for something, you want that card to be changing the game in some way, and this card is just completely underpowered in terms of power and toughness for its cost, and it has no effect, so it's a useless card. Another card which is pretty terrible and I would never play is Soothing Breeze. Maybe very situationally. I mean, everyone can find a use for some card, but this card essentially, you pay 2, you gain 7 life, which on the surface doesn't seem that bad, but you're giving yourself card disadvantage, and card advantage is very important. Having more cards than your opponent and making favourable trades and using cards that take out their cards and don't use up any of your cards, that's very good. The worst thing you can be doing is playing a card that doesn't affect the board in any way, doesn't affect the game in any way other than giving you health, which is, you know, maybe you'll live an extra turn, but you're still not getting rid of the things that are killing you. You play this card, you lose it, that's it, it's gone. It doesn't change anything, it doesn't kill anything, you just lost a card by paying 2 mana. These types of cards are ones you want to avoid. Anything that gives you card disadvantage is something to be wary of, and a lot of the cards that fall into this category of dregs or do not play, they're often cards that end you up with card disadvantage. Another easy card to see that gives you card disadvantage is this Avalanche Giant. You have to choose and discard 2 cards and deal 4 damage to your troops. So you're trading 2 cards to possibly kill 1 card. Maybe you can't even kill it with this 4 damage, so you know, it's not that great. It's giving you card disadvantage. If you do kill something with it, you've traded 2 cards for 1 card, which is never good. And, well, I say never good. Maybe it's okay if you're trying to get rid of a bomb and it's about to kill you, and that could win you the game. Again, it's situational. You have to weigh your situation, you have to weigh what's going on, but I would personally never play this card because I don't really see a use for it. You know, you're better off just playing a bigger troop for 5 cost, like a Boulder Brute or something. You know, that could probably get rid of the things you want to get rid of with this far more easily than this guy can without losing you cards. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole deal. The B, R, E, A, and D are very much in priority order. You want your bombs first, then your removal, then your evasion and efficient cards, then your aggro and abilities, filler cards, and then finally your dregs, which are cards you just don't want to play or pick. If you follow these rules, you should be able to put together a pretty decent deck. Obviously, always keep your eye out for removals, always keep your eye out for bombs. Don't stick to these rules. If you think a card's going to be better because you have a certain synergy in your deck, like cards working together in a certain way that's really powerful, you may want to skip this over. And another reason for perhaps not sticking to the B.R.E.A.D system is because you're in an archetype like dwarves, and another reason is because the card really just doesn't fit into your curve. So that leads me on nicely into my next video, which is going to be about the deck construction during draft. Going to talk to you a bit about how we put the deck together and the resource curve of the deck. If you want to head to that video, it's down here. If you want to subscribe to me, you can find the link over here, and there's a link to my stream below the channel in the description box. Obviously, watching people draft is always good, so if you want to pick up some tips, go head over to Twitch, watch some Hex streamers, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.